All right, strap in, everyone. We're about to take a deep dive into some seriously spooky stuff. We're talking Ouija boards, folks.
Yeah, those mysterious boards that people use to supposedly contact spirits and, well, things don't always go as planned.
Definitely not. You guys sent us a YouTube video with 6 stories about people using Ouija boards.
That's right.
And let me tell you, some of these folks got way more than they bargained for.
It's like, everyone starts with a mix of curiosity, right? Like, is this thing real? Can we really talk to ghosts? But then things take a turn fast. And that little voice of doubt gets drowned out by some seriously creepy stuff.
Okay, so let's jump right into our first story, the premonition fire.
Ooh, yeah, this one's a doozy. We've got a mother and daughter who decide to use a Ouija board to contact their deceased dog.
Oh, that actually sounds kind of sweet, like they're just missing their furry friend.
You'd think so, but then the board spells out a chilling prediction. Their deaths.
Oh, no.
And just hours later, their house burns down.
What?
Yeah, they both end up critically injured.
That's awful. And you know what's even creepier? The husband had claimed the dog was possessed after a previous Ouija board session.
Blaming the board, huh? You have to wonder if they were already kind of primed to see bad omens after that first experience.
Right, like they were expecting something bad to happen.
It's called confirmation bias. We tend to look for information that confirms what we already believe. So after that initial incident with the dog, they might have been more likely to see any strange event as like a sign of something sinister.
So are you saying the board didn't actually cause the fire, but their experience with the board, like, influenced how they saw things afterwards?
Exactly. And grief, that can intensify these feelings. When you're dealing with loss, you might search for meaning or explanations, even if it's just random events.
That makes a lot of sense. Okay, let's move on to our next story. This one is called Right Now in the Woods.
Ooh, the woods at night. Classic horror movie setting.
Right. This one takes place at a prestigious boarding school where 4 boys decide to sneak out and use a Ouija board.
Ooh, breaking the rules.
They ask the board about one of the boys' future, and it spells out right now.
Chills.
Right. And then all of a sudden, one of the boys, Ferlin, starts acting super strange.
Yeah.
Like, he has what looks like a seizure, he attacks his friend, and then he has absolutely no memory of the event.
Like a total blackout.
Yeah. It's like his personality completely changed in an instant. And that memory loss, that's what really gets me. It's like something took control of him.
It's definitely creepy. This story makes me think about suggestibility, how open we are to being influenced by others. And teenagers, especially in a group setting, they're super susceptible to that.
Right, especially when they're already doing something they're not supposed to be doing. Sneaking out, messing with a Ouija board. It creates this atmosphere where they're expecting something to happen.
Yeah, and think about the setting too, the woods at night.
Yeah.
Our senses are already on high alert in the dark, and that environment just adds to the suspense. So their imaginations fueled by the creepy setting, the group dynamic, it could have all played a role in what happened.
It's like a recipe for a spooky experience.
Oh.
Okay, on to story number 3. I Can See You.
Okay, this one is just straight up creepy.
It takes place in a dark, creepy basement. I mean, already we're setting the stage for some chills.
Right, like why are basements always so scary?
Seriously. So 3 friends are using a Ouija board, and they get a message that reads, "I can see you through the window."
And then what happens?
They immediately hear knocking on that exact window.
No way.
Talk about a jump scare. I mean, this one really taps into that primal fear of being watched.
It's funny how the setting can amplify that fear. Basements are often associated with isolation and vulnerability. It's dark, your senses are heightened, and your imagination just takes over.
So even if there wasn't anyone actually outside that window, their minds were already on edge, and they might have just created that experience themselves.
Like our brains are wired to find patterns, make connections, even if those connections aren't really there.
Wow, that's really interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, let's switch gears and head to Mexico for our next story.
Mexico. Okay, this should be good.
This one's called Possessed in Mexico, and it involves 3 friends who experience some wild physical and psychological symptoms after using a Ouija board. We're talking convulsions, hallucinations, erratic behavior. There's even video footage of one of the friends, Alexandra, growling and thrashing around.
Whoa, seriously, that sounds intense, like full-on possession movie stuff.
It's pretty wild. And this story brings up the idea of mass hysteria, right? Where a group of people start experiencing similar physical or psychological symptoms, often because of a perceived threat.
So like, not actually possessed, but their shared belief and the intensity of the situation created this collective experience.
Exactly. Think about it. They're using a Ouija board, Already there's a lot of anxiety and excitement. Then one person starts acting strange and others witness it. They share those anxieties.
Yeah.
It can become like a chain reaction, fueled by fear and suggestion.
Wow, that's a powerful reminder of how our social environment can influence us, even physically.
Definitely gives you something to think about. All right, are you ready for our next story?
Hit me with it. I'm on the edge of my seat.
Okay, this one is called Death Comes Now.
Ah.
And it's less about paranormal activity and more about tragic timing.
Ooh. Okay, I'm intrigued.
So we've got 3 brothers who decide to use a Ouija board to ask about their deaths.
Asking a Ouija board about your death? That's bold.
And the board spells out a very chilling message. Death comes now.
Oh, no.
And shortly after that, their father calls with the news that their mother has died in a car crash.
Oh my gosh, that's heartbreaking. And the timing of the message, it just makes it all the more unsettling.
I know, it's hard to hear. This story really gets at the heart of why people are drawn to Ouija boards in the first place, that desire to know what the future holds.
Especially when it comes to life and death, right? Like, we all want to know.
But it also makes you question the nature of these predictions. Are they real glimpses into the future, or just coincidences that seem significant because of what happens afterward?
Right, like, what does it all mean? It's impossible to say for sure. But what's interesting here is the psychological impact. Imagine getting a message like that, and then shortly after, your worst fear comes true. You'd never be able to separate those two events.
Right, like the message becomes permanently etched in your memory, and it changes how you view that event forever.
Exactly. And, grief can make us even more susceptible to making those connections. We might look for meaning in random events, or cling to any shred of hope that our loved ones are still with us in some way.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, we've arrived at our final story, and this one really seems to stick with people.
Well.
Zozo and the Black Figure.
Oh, I've heard of this one. It's got all the classic horror elements.
It does. So picture this. 3 friends, a Ouija board in a basement.
Classic. What could go wrong, right?
They're trying to contact the deceased grandmother, but instead they encounter this entity named Zozo.
Zozo. That name comes up a lot in Ouija board stories, doesn't it? It's like he's the ultimate Ouija board bad guy.
Yeah, it's interesting how certain names or symbols take on this cultural significance. They become shorthand for evil or the unknown.
Like, you hear Zozo and you instantly know it's going to be bad news. It speaks to the power of storytelling too, right? These tales get passed down and they shape our expectations even if we haven't personally experienced anything paranormal.
Yeah, like we already know the rules before we even start playing the game.
Yeah.
So back to the story. These friends are seeking connection with their grandmother. They're looking for comfort or closure.
But instead, they get Zozo.
Right, and one of the friends, Frank, gets frustrated. He demands to speak to his grandmother. It's like he's challenging this entity.
Oh, that never ends well in these stories. It's like they always have to push the boundaries.
Yeah, and sometimes those boundaries push back. So what happens next?
Well, suddenly the lights in the basement switch off. Click. And they're plunged into darkness.
Oh no, I'd be freaking out.
They grab a flashlight, right? And as they shine it towards the stairs, they see a black figure standing by the light switch.
No way!
It's totally black, no features, just a silhouette. Super eerie.
Like something out of a nightmare.
And then, just as quickly as it appeared, it vanishes. The lights come back on and they're left standing there wondering what they just saw.
Spooky.
So they do what any sane person would do. They run upstairs, lock the basement door, and vow to never touch a Ouija board again. But here's the thing that really sends chills down my spine. Both Frank and Sarah agree that the black figure they saw resembled their grandmother.
Oh wow, that adds a whole other layer to the story. Like, was the figure actually malevolent? Or was it really their grandmother somehow transformed or influenced by Zozo?
Right. Or was it just their fear playing tricks on them? It's those unanswered questions that make these stories so compelling.
Definitely. So there you have it. 6 stories each, touching on different aspects of the unknown. Premonitions, sudden personality changes, creepy messages, encounters with mysterious entities.
It's like these boards tap into something deep within us, something that both fascinates and terrifies us.
Yeah, and these stories, whether you believe they're true accounts or just spooky tales, they reflect our fascination with the boundary between the known and the unknown.
Absolutely. The Ouija board, regardless of whether it actually works or not, acts as a focal point for our hopes, fears, and anxieties about death, the afterlife, and communicating with forces beyond our understanding.
It's like a mirror reflecting our own beliefs and anxieties about the world. And it's interesting how many of these stories involve people trying to connect with loved ones who have passed away.
Yeah, there's a deep sadness and longing in those stories. It's like they're using the Ouija board as a way to bridge the gap between life and death.
Right, it speaks to our human need for closure, for reassurance that our loved ones are still with us in some way.
And maybe that's why the Ouija board continues to hold such a powerful allure despite its reputation. It offers a glimmer of hope, a possibility, however slim, of reaching out to those we've lost.
You're right. It's a reminder that even in the darkest of times, we still seek connection, we seek meaning, and we search for a way to make sense of the world around us.
Exactly. And in that search, we often turn to stories, myths, and rituals that offer us comfort, understanding, and maybe even a fleeting glimpse into the realms beyond our everyday experience.
Well said. We've covered a lot of ground here. 6 stories, countless chills, and some thought-provoking insights into the world of Ouija boards and the human psyche.
And what's really striking is the recurring theme of unintended consequences. Many of these people probably approached the Ouija board with a mix of curiosity and skepticism. They didn't expect to experience anything truly supernatural.
Right, they were just messing around.
Exactly. But the outcomes were often far from what they anticipated.
Whether it's a house fire, a sudden personality change, or an encounter with a terrifying entity, these stories serve as cautionary tales about dabbling with the unknown.
It's like opening a door that you might not be able to close.
Yeah, inviting in forces you can't control. And that's another thing that keeps popping up in these stories, that loss of control. Like in several stories, people experience seizures, convulsions, or feeling like they're being overtaken by some external force.
Right. It's tapping into that primal fear of losing yourself, your identity, your sense of who you are.
It's definitely unsettling. And then, of course, there's the element of suggestibility, especially in the stories involving groups of people. The heightened emotions, the atmosphere of anticipation, and the power of group dynamics. It can create a situation where people are more susceptible to suggestion. And that leads to these shared experiences that may or may not be rooted in objective reality.
Like the 3 friends in Mexico who experienced convulsions and hallucinations. Their shared belief in the power of the Ouija board, along with the social dynamics of that situation, most likely played a huge role in what they experienced.
It really makes you wonder about the line between belief and reality, doesn't it? How much of what we experience is shaped by our own expectations, our cultural conditioning, and the power of suggestion.
It's a question that philosophers and psychologists have been debating for centuries. These stories, while entertaining and thought-provoking, don't provide any definitive answers, but they do give us a glimpse into the complex interaction between our minds, our beliefs, and the world around us.
And I think that's what makes them so fascinating. They leave us with more questions than answers, encouraging us to think about the mysteries of the unknown and the depths of our own minds.
And maybe that's the real power of the Ouija board. Not necessarily as a tool for talking to spirits, but as a way to explore the uncharted territory of our own imaginations, fears, and beliefs.
Well said. So what do you think? Are these just spooky stories meant to entertain us? Or is there something more to it? We've given you the facts, the context, and some possible interpretations. Now it's up to you to decide what you believe.
You know, before we wrap up, there's one last thing I find really interesting. A lot of these stories involve people wanting to connect with loved ones who have passed away. They're using the Ouija board as a way to bridge that gap between life and death.
That's true. There's a real sense of sadness and longing in those stories. It's like they're desperately trying to hold on to a connection that's been broken.
And maybe that's why the Ouija board is still so popular, despite all the scary stories. It offers a glimmer of hope, however small, that we can reach out to those we've lost and find some comfort in the face of our own mortality.
It's a reminder that even when things are tough, we still look for connection, for meaning, and for a way to understand the world around us.
Exactly. And in that search, we often turn to stories, myths, and rituals that offer us comfort, understanding, and maybe even a glimpse into something beyond our everyday lives.
All right, that was a lot to process. 6 stories, countless chills, and some thought-provoking insights into the world of Ouija boards and the human mind. I think we've all earned a deep breath in a moment to let that sink in. Then we'll wrap things up and leave you with one final thought to ponder.
Sounds good to me. Take a moment, folks. Let it all sink in.
All right, so we left off talking about how our social environment can, totally influence our experiences.
Yeah, especially when you're dealing with something as loaded as a Ouija board.
Okay, ready for story number 5.
Hit me.
This one's called Death Comes Now, and it's a bit different. It's less about, ghosts and stuff, and more about this really eerie coincidence.
A coincidence? Okay, I'm curious. Tell me more.
So there are these 3 brothers, and they're messing around with a Ouija board, and for some reason, they decide to ask about their deaths.
I mean, who does that, right?
I know, it's kind of asking for trouble.
But they did, so what happened?
Well, the board spells out this super creepy message. Death comes now.
Oh no, I can already see where this is going.
Right. And then, not long after, their dad calls. Their mom has died in a car crash.
Oh, wow. That's just awful. And the timing of that message, it just makes it so much worse.
I know. It's heartbreaking. And it really makes you think about why people are drawn to Ouija boards in the first place.
Yeah, like there's that deep human need to know what's going to happen, especially when it comes to things like life and death.
Totally.
Yeah.
But it also makes you wonder about the nature of these predictions. Like, are they really glimpses into the future? Or are they just coincidences that we give more meaning to because of what happens afterward?
It's impossible to know for sure, but the psychological impact, that's what really gets me. Imagine receiving a message like that, death comes now,
Yeah.
and then shortly after, the person you love most in the world dies.
I can't even imagine.
It would be almost impossible to separate those two events in your mind.
Right. Like that message would be seared into your memory forever.
And, you know, grief can make us even more likely to see connections between things that might not be connected. We're searching for meaning, for some sign that our loved ones are still with us somehow.
That makes sense. All right, well, we've got one more story to go. And this one is a classic. It's got all the spooky elements you could ask for.
Lay it on me.
This is the story of Zozo and the Black Figure.
Okay, yeah, I've heard of this one. It's like the ultimate Ouija board horror story.
It really is.
Yeah.
So we've got three friends. They're in a basement, which is already kind of creepy, and they're using a Ouija board.
Sounds like the start of every scary movie ever.
Right. They're trying to contact a deceased grandmother. You know, they're looking for some kind of connection.
But things don't exactly go as planned.
Nope. Instead of their sweet grandma, they get this entity named Zozo.
Zozo, yeah, that name is like synonymous with Ouija board evil.
Seriously. It's amazing how certain names or symbols can just become like culturally embedded as representations of something bad or unknown.
Totally, like you hear Zozo and you instantly know it's going to be a bad time.
Right. And it really speaks to the power of storytelling. You know, these stories get passed down and they shape our expectations, even if we haven't personally had any spooky experiences.
It's like we already know the rules of the game before we even start playing.
So, in this story, these friends are trying to connect with their grandmother. They're looking for comfort, but instead they get Zozo.
And then what happens?
Well, one of the friends, Frank, he gets frustrated. He's like, I want to talk to my grandmother. He demands to speak to her.
Oh no! Never challenge the demon.
Right. It's like, why do people always feel the need to push the boundaries with these things?
It's like they're testing the limits of the unknown, seeing how far they can go.
And sometimes those limits push back.
Yeah, sometimes they bite back. Hard. So what happened when Frank challenged Zozo?
Well, the lights go out. Suddenly it's pitch black in the basement.
I would have died right there.
Right. So they grab a flashlight and they shine it toward the stairs. And there, by the light switch, is a black figure.
Oh, hell no.
It's completely black, no features, just a silhouette. Super creepy.
Like a shadow person.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then, just as quickly as it appears, it vanishes. Poof, gone. The lights come back on, and the friends are just standing there trying to make sense of what they just saw.
I bet they noped right out of there.
They did. They ran upstairs, locked the basement door, and swore they would never touch a Ouija board again.
I can't say I blame them.
But here's the really creepy part. Both Frank and Sarah, they both agree that the black figure they saw, it kind of looked like their grandmother.
Whoa, that adds a whole other layer to the story. Like, was it really their grandmother? Or was it Zozo disguised as her? Or was it just their fear playing tricks on them?
It's impossible to know. But that's what makes these stories so fascinating, right? They leave us with more questions than answers.
Absolutely. So we've got 6 stories here, 6 encounters with the unknown. Premonitions, personality changes, eerie messages, and mysterious entities. It's like these boards tap into something deep within us, something that both fascinates and terrifies us.
For sure. And these stories, whether we believe they're true or not, they reflect our enduring fascination with the boundary between the known and the unknown.
Totally. The Ouija board, whether it actually has any power or not, acts as this focal point for our hopes and fears about death, the afterlife, and the possibility of communicating with something beyond our understanding.
It's like a mirror to our own beliefs and anxieties about the world. And, you know, it's interesting how many of these stories involve people trying to connect with loved ones who have passed away.
Yeah, there's a deep sadness and longing in those stories. It's like they're using the Ouija board as a way to bridge that gap between life and death, to hold on to a connection that's been broken.
And maybe that's why the Ouija board continues to hold such a strong appeal, despite all the creepy stories. It offers a glimmer of hope, however slim, that we can reach out to those we've lost, find some comfort in the face of our own mortality.
It's a reminder that even in the darkest of times, we still seek connection, meaning, and a way to make sense of the world.
Yeah, as we're going through these stories, I keep noticing how many of them take place in these liminal spaces.
Liminal spaces. What do you mean by that?
Like places and times that are kind of in between basements, dark woods, the late hours of the night. They're all places where the boundary between the familiar and the unfamiliar seems to blur. Oh, I see what you mean. It's like those spaces create a sense of vulnerability, right? Like we're more open to suggestion, more likely to perceive things that might not actually be there.
Exactly. Think about how our senses are heightened in the dark. Our imaginations have more room to run wild, filling in the blanks, creating connections that might not exist in the light of day.
So it's not necessarily that these places are haunted or dangerous, but that they kind of prime us for these uncanny experiences.
Right. They tap into our primal fears of the unknown, the things that might be lurking just beyond our perception.
Which ties back to what we were talking about earlier, with the Ouija board acting as a conduit for our subconscious fears and desires.
Totally. In those liminal spaces, our inhibitions are lower, our imaginations are more active, and we're more likely to project our own anxieties onto the world around us.
So, as we go about our lives, it's interesting to pay attention to those moments when things feel a little off. Those times when we catch a glimpse of something beyond the everyday. Maybe it's just our imagination, but maybe it's a sign that there's more to the world than we realize.
Absolutely. Pay attention to the stories you tell yourself, the fears that whisper in the back of your mind, the way your perception shapes your experience. You might discover that the most fascinating mysteries aren't found in haunted houses or ancient graveyards, but within the depths of your own mind and the spaces where your imagination takes flight.
I love that. Okay, well, we've covered a lot of ground today. 6 spooky stories, some thought-provoking psychology, and hopefully we've given you all something to think about when it comes to Ouija boards and the unknown.
Remember, whether you see these stories as true accounts or just entertainment, they offer a glimpse into the complex relationship between our minds, our beliefs, and the world we live in. And that's something worth thinking about even after the Ouija board is put away.
All right, folks, that's our deep dive into the world of Ouija boards for today. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep your mind open to the wonders and mysteries all around us. So we were just talking about these liminal spaces, right? These places that feel kind of in between.
Yeah, like they exist on the edge of things.
And you were saying how those spaces can actually make us more susceptible to having those spooky, uncanny experiences.
Exactly. It's like they prime our minds for the unusual,
Because our senses are heightened, our imaginations run wild.
And we might be more likely to, project our fears onto the world around us.
So even if there's nothing inherently supernatural happening in those spaces,
Our brains are kind of ready to see it that way,
it's like we're creating our own ghost stories.
In a way, yeah. Our minds are powerful things, and they can definitely influence how we perceive the world, especially when we're in those in-between places.
It's fascinating, really. Makes you wonder, how much of what we experience is actually real and how much is just our own interpretation.
Big questions, right? The kind that philosophers have been debating for centuries.
And maybe those questions are part of what make these stories so compelling. They don't give us any easy answers, they just make us think.
And maybe that's the point, right? Maybe it's not about finding definitive proof of ghosts or demons or whatever. Maybe it's about exploring the mysteries, both inside and outside of ourselves.
Maybe the real journey is the one we take within our own minds.
And that's a journey we can all take, whether we believe in the supernatural or not. We can all pay attention to the stories we tell ourselves, to the fears that whisper in the back of our minds, to the way our perceptions shape our reality.
It's like a deep dive into our own consciousness,
Exactly. And sometimes those inner explorations can be just as fascinating and just as unsettling as any encounter with the unknown.
Well, folks, I think that's a pretty good place to wrap up our deep dive into the world of Ouija boards. We've heard some chilling tales, explored some intriguing psychology, and hopefully we've given you all some food for thought.
Whether you see these stories as true accounts or just spooky entertainment, they offer a glimpse into the human mind's fascination with the unknown. And they remind us that, in the end, we're all just trying to make sense of the world around us. and maybe even find a little bit of comfort in the face of the great mystery.
Beautifully said. So until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep your minds open to the wonders and mysteries that await.